In today's world, we think of slavery as a misfortune of the past. We think of the 11,863,000 Africans that were shipped across the Atlantic, and the 10 to 20% death rate within them as a shameful truth. Now we are in the 21st century, and such horrendous acts would never happen here again, right? Not so fast. No matter how much we call our country the land of the free, forced servitude has hardly faded. If you think slavery ended in 1865, think again. While present-day slavery may sound like a faraway misfortune of distant nations, the truth is that it could not get much closer or more relevant to us. Despite common misconception, slavery has persisted through the centuries and is a modern American problem. The State Department estimates that as many as 17,500 people each year are trafficked across our borders. To understand how human trafficking has developed and what is being done today, we first have to understand human trafficking and its evolution. Human trafficking is the recruitment, transport, transfer, harboring, or receipt of a person by such means as threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction or fraud or deception for the use of exploitation, as defined by the UN Trafficking Protocol. These victims are threatened, deceived, and forced into labor, sex, servitude, or organ removal, and are fully controlled by their captors. There is no difference between human trafficking today and the slavery practices we mistakenly consider a thing of the past. No matter which way you look at it, there is slavery in America today.
When a man desperate for work finds himself in a factory or on a fishing boat or in a field, working, toiling, for little or no pay and beaten if he tries to escape, that is slavery. When a woman is locked in a sweatshop or trapped in a home as a domestic servant, alone and abused, and incapable of leaving, that's slavery. When a little boy is kidnapped, turned into a child soldier, forced to kill or be killed, that's slavery. When a little girl is sold by her impoverished family, the girl's my daughter's age, runs away from home or is lured by the false promise of a better life and then imprisoned in a brothel and tortured if she resists, that's slavery.
Let's look back to where it began. Slavery has existed in America for hundreds of years, since the Europeans who settled here brought slaves from Africa to work in agriculture and domestic servitude, in what was then a generally accepted practice and societal norm. On January 31st, 1865, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution was signed, declaring that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction. In 1904, the International Agreement for the Suppression of White Slave Traffic was created, but it was not for another 23 years that it was revised to protect all women and children, regardless of race. In 1949, the United Nations Convention of the Traffic in Persons and Exploitation of the Prostitution of Others was passed, requiring for the first time that participating countries outlaw prostitution. Of the 600 to 800,000 victims brought each year to the United States, most are women and girls from Asian and Central American countries who are forced to serve in the sex industry or as domestic servants. Men are also trafficked for forced labor and increasingly for sex. While many victims smuggled from abroad are trapped even more deeply into servitude by a lack of English, English-speaking Americans are also being targeted. 83% of victims of sexual trafficking in the United States are in fact U.S. citizens. More than half of all victims say they know their traffickers. After nearly 65 years, how does trafficking persist? Because of a thorough and careful system that evades the law, misleads its victims, and deals in massive amounts of money, it is often difficult to detect that anything is going on. Fake passports, smugglers, and lies are what transport victims from one country to the next. Human trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar operation, responsible for quite nearly half of the $32 billion international crime industry, according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. So why don't we hear more about it? Between 1980 and 1994, major newspapers, the New York Times and Washington Post, published only about 66 articles on human trafficking, an average of just 4.4 publications per year. There has been some increase, with 70 articles in 2006, but gaining public awareness of modern-day slavery remains a work in progress. There still seems to be a devastatingly low level of public awareness and concern on the matter. The coverage of this problem has slowly been increasing and brought to the attention of higher authorities. Today, organizations such as Polaris, a project started in 2002 by Catherine Chon and Eric Ellerman of Brown University, are working to raise awareness and eradicate slavery once and for all. January 11, 2010 is the first official Human Trafficking Awareness Day, as set forth by President Obama.
And today I want to discuss an issue that relates to each of these challenges. It ought to concern every person because it is a debasement of our common humanity. It ought to concern every community because it tears at our social fabric. It ought to concern every business because it distorts markets. It ought to concern every nation because it endangers public health and fuels violence and organized crime. I'm talking about the injustice, the outrage of human trafficking, which must be called by its true name, modern slavery. Now, as president, I've made it clear that the United States will continue to be a leader in this global movement. We've got a comprehensive strategy. We're shining a spotlight on the dark corners where it persists. Under Hillary's leadership, we're doing more than ever with our annual trafficking report, with new outreach and partnerships, to give countries incentives to meet their responsibilities and calling them out when they don't. I recently renewed sanctions on some of the worst abusers, including North Korea and Eritrea. We're partnering with groups that help women and children escape from the grip of their abusers. We're helping other countries step up their own efforts, and we're seeing results. More nations have passed, and more are enforcing modern anti-trafficking laws.
America is making progress, but there are still thousands of people in our country alone, people we may see every day without connecting the dots, who are being stifled in what should be their place of opportunity. Amanda Clower of Change.org remarks that human trafficking is an issue that can be stopped by our generation, not only in America, but worldwide. Slavery can and must be a thing of the past.
Imagine you're a slave. It's 1787. You work 14 hours a day and are subject to cruel punishments if you don't work hard enough. You're owned and not paid a penny for your work. You will not grow old. You plant, tend and harvest most of the world's crops non-stop until you die. Your slavery brings great wealth to a few. To change all that is unthinkable. However, in the back of a printing shop in London, 12 ordinary men are thinking the unthinkable. Unknown to you, a great wheel has begun to turn. As these 12 men well know, in Britain there are no caravans of chained captives or whip-wielding overseers stalking rows of sugarcane. Their campaign will have to make ordinary people understand what goes on to bring them the sugar they eat, the coffee they drink, and the tobacco they smoke. And it will work. In 20 years, the world will be changed. William Wilberforce will champion the cause in Parliament, and the bill making the trading of slaves illegal will be signed into law on the 25th of March, 1807. To take the next step, to outlaw the ownership of slaves, will take another 30 years. Wilberforce won't live to see it. Neither will you. Now, you are you again. It's 2007. The great wheel has been turning for 220 years, yet still, at the very least, there are 20 million people trapped in some form of slavery. Legally, there are none, but new words, sleight of presentation, government complicity, and more than a few blind eyes cloak the slavery that still exists. Poverty, desperation, and ignorance hide or disguise what lies ahead for those who find themselves tricked, traded, trafficked, kidnapped, forced, bonded, or conscripted. Now there is a slavery for everyone. Sex, tourism, prostitution and pornography, bonded or forced labor, caste-based slavery, and the worst forms of child labor require an endless supply of slaves. The unprofitable are quickly discarded and replaced. They are disposable people. You and the rest of us will make the world what it will be in 2107. We're the ordinary people who need to know what lies behind the sugar we eat, the coffee we drink, the tobacco we smoke, and the clothes we wear. We need to break down apathy and prejudice and uphold the right of every human being to be free. Finishing a task can be just as hard, just as inspiring, as starting it. Only when there are no slaves can the wheel finally slow down and stop. Nobody is free until everyone is free.
Songs on the wind over Africa, the dreams that can never be, for the hearts and souls that were carried away over the deep and restless sea, over the restless sea. See them sail away, see them sail away, on the wind so wild and free, under a guilty and silent sky, over the restless sea. for the moon over Africa, for all that a life could be, for the faith and hope that were carried away over the deep and restless sea, over the restless sea.
A film called Simply Sold tells the story of a Nepali teenager who was trafficked to an Indian brothel. According to the charity Childreach, the majority of the trafficked Nepali children are girls aged between 12 and 18, who are primarily sold into the Indian sex industry. In some districts, the rate of trafficking is so high that there are barely any young girls growing up in rural villages. Firoz Patel is the London head of Childreach.
When we started to conduct our research, we'd heard about this one particular region in Nepal where trafficking was on the increase, and this one village where there were no adolescent girls living at all. And, the reasons why there were no girls, we started to talk to families, parents, just to try and understand where their children were. And the common reason that we were hearing was that these families were being approached by what we call in Hindi dalals or pimps or traffickers who were coming to villages and offering, especially poor families, brighter futures for their children. They were offering jobs for their children as domestic workers in India. And parents were believing and being tricked into sending their children overseas. You have a whole village where there are no girls. No teenage girls whatsoever. We were trying to understand what were the root causes behind this. And our research has kind of pointed to one very specific thing. The root cause why people, especially families, poor families, sending their children overseas is poverty. Poverty is the root cause.
It's estimated that 20,000 Nepali girls are sold into sex slavery each year and sent to work in brothels in India. But trafficking is not just confined to Nepal. It's an international problem. In London, it's estimated that you're never more than a few hundred yards away from a trafficked victim. According to the UK Human Trafficking Centre, there were 369 potential victims of slavery between January and August 2013. More than a third of the 369 potential victims were children. Figures from a Freedom of Information request submitted to London's Metropolitan Police Service in April this year revealed that 186 victims had been trafficked into the capital city for sex in 2013. An increase of 39 on the previous year. The majority were found to be working in brothels in Westminster. 114 people were arrested and 201 people were charged. In 2012, a similar number of police operations discovered 147 victims of sex trafficking in London. 70 people were arrested, 35 people were charged. Despite the geographical distance between Nepal and England, a survivor's story is a familiar one. Sold, which showcases in London this week, tells the story of a young girl who was trafficked from Nepal and forced to work in a brothel in Mumbai. Sunita Doniwar, president of anti-trafficking organisation Shakti Sumaha, has a similar story. She agreed to speak with me in London through a translator.
त्यही काम गर्ने क्रममा चाहिँ त्यहाँ चाहिँ दुईजना नेपालीहरू जो चाहिँ ट्र्याक्टर चलाउँथे.
Well, where we were working, there were two Nepalese men who were driving a tractor.
र त्यो ट्र्याक्टर चलाउने क्रममा उनीहरू चाहिँ हामीसँग नजिक हुन खोज्थ्यो.
Those two tractor drivers always wanted to be close with us.
अनि त्यसपछि उनीहरू मसँग एकदम धेरै चाहिँ हुन खोज्थे तर म चाहिँ कहिले पनि उनीहरुसँग नजिक हुन चाहेन.
Especially with me, they always want to be close with me, but I never been with them.
र त्यसपछि चाहिँ हामीले पैसा कमाएपछि अब हामी जाने भनेर मेरो बुवाले चाहिँ ठेकदारसँग हिसाबहरु गर्नुभयो.
Once we had a bit of money, my father decided to do a accounting with the contractor.
अनि त्यो कुरा चाहिँ त्यो दुई जनाले पनि थाहा पायो.
And two driver came to knew that we're taking the money from the contractor and about to leave.
अनि उनीहरुले चाहिँ पछि बुवासँग चाहिँ नजिक भएर हामी पनि यहाँ काम गर्दैन तपाईहरुसँगै जान्छु र तपाईको छोरा खोज्न सहयोग गर्छु भनेर उनीहरुले चाहिँ भन्यो.
The two driver told my dad that they don't want to work here anymore. We'll just come with you and help to find your son.
अनि त्यसपछि बुवाले चाहिँ नाइ भन्न सक्नु भएन.
Daddy couldn't say no.
अनि हुन्छ जाम भनेर अनि हामी चाहिँ त्यो दिन सामान्य होटलमा बास बस्यौं.
Dad says, okay, let's go together, and we left that place and stay in the hotel, the very small hotel.
अनि त्यो होटलमा बसेर हामीले खाना साना खाइसकेपछि त्यो केटाहरुले चाहिँ मिठाई ल्याएर आयो.
Once we were in the hotel, after a dinner, the two tractor driver came back again with sweets.
अनि उनीहरूले पहिलो प्रस्ताव चाहिँ मलाई गर्यो खाऊ भनेर
They proposed me with the sweet to eat at the beginning.
तर मैले चाहिँ खान मानिन
I didn't want to take it.
त्यसपछि चाहिँ बुवा मम्मीलाई दियो
And they offered to mom and dad.
अनि के अरे मम्मी बुवाले चाहिँ खाउन त खाऊ यो चाहिँ तिम्रो दाइ समान नै हो दाइ बहिनी सम्झेर दिएछ खाऊ भनेर भन्नुभयो तर पनि मैले खान नमानेपछि बुवा मम्मीले खानुभयो
Mom and dad persuaded me as well, just take the sweets because they were thinking me as their sister. So I didn't take the sweet, but my mom and dad took the sweet.
त्यसपछि मैले खाएँ
And once the mom and dad has taken the sweet, I took the sweet as well.
अनि त्यसपछि मलाई के पनि थाहा छैन म चाहिँ जब होस खोल्यो म मुम्बईको ब्रथल पुगिसकेको थिएँ
After that, I've got no consciousness. Only thing is when I become conscious, I found myself in Mumbai.
र त्यति बेला चाहिँ म 14 वर्षको थिएँ
I was only 14 at the time.
अनि त्यसपछि त्यहाँ चाहिँ म 1 महिना फाइट गरेँ त्यो घरमा
I fought almost for a month in that place.
अनि उनीहरूले मलाई काट्छु मार्छु तेरो घाँटी छिनाउँछु सम्म भने
They even threatened me to kill me, chop my head off
यदि मैले त्यो काम गरिन
if I don't do the work.
तर मैले नमानेपछि 1 महिनापछि उनीहरूले अर्को घरमा बेचे
And I resisted. I didn't do the work, so they sold me to the different house.
अनि त्यसपछि त्यहाँ चाहिँ अब उनीहरूले अब मलाई अर्को घरमा बेचिसकेपछि त त्यहाँनिर ग्याङ रेप गराए
And once I've been sold to the different house, I was been gang raped in that house. Before we used to blame ourselves that being trafficked is because of my own fault. But after the counseling and the training, we said, we haven't done any wrong. We're just a victim of somebody's bad deed. Why should we be crying because of somebody did a bad thing on us? So we decided to convert our tears and our blood, everything into a power. And that's how we changed our life. That's how the organization formed called Sakti Samma, which means a power group.
Neerja Naik is an Indian-born British actress who befriends the lead character in the film Sold.
Playing the role, I had to make Anita's life of living in this brothel and servicing men every night, make it feel like it was a routine to be realistic in the character. And I did find sometimes that made me feel a bit numb to sort of like the reality of it all. But I remember there was one moment, many moments on set, but there was one particular moment, the first time that the reality of everything really set in was when Mumtaz, who plays the madam of the brothel, invites myself and another character, Shahana, to put makeup on Lakshmi for the first time. And, she's completely unknowing. She doesn't know what she's got herself in for. And I remember just looking at her and listening to these instructions about makeup that Mumtaz was giving, and the penny just dropped. And literally my heart just sank. I was, very overcome by the reality of that situation. I'm Indian, but I'm from England. And I think it's really important that we shine light on this topic as a whole, because it isn't just an issue in India. It's an issue everywhere in the world. Doing the film has definitely educated me a lot about the issue. And, I, like many people, literally knew nothing about it. And the numbers are just astounding. I mean, you think that slavery doesn't really exist now, but it really does. I mean, you've got 20 million people who live in the world in some form of slavery, and sort of baffles you as to how that can be the case in this day and age.
Child Reach Nepal is working with anti-trafficking organisation Shakti Samuha to try and keep young girls at risk of being sold into slavery in school. Its campaign, #TaughtNotTrafficked, hopes the UK premiere of Sold will highlight the global problem of slavery and prevent more than 2,000 Nepali girls from ending up in the hands of traffickers and missing out on their education.